The wind rolled low across the Wyoming plains, dragging cold dust through the empty main street of Stenner's Hollow. Inside the old sheriff's office, Officer Luke Mercer sat in the dark with his dog, Ranger, a black German shepherd whose eyes caught the light like wet coal. The radio had gone quiet hours ago, but Luke couldn't sleep, not since a missing girl case 2 towns over. Ranger stirred, ears twitching, muscles tight. Then a single sharp bark, urgent, almost frantic. Luke felt it before he heard it. Something was wrong. And this time it was close. The night had been silent for days, that heavy, country silence that sits on the chest like a weight. Luke Mercer lived on the edge of it, a 1-story cabin leaning into the hills west of town. Beyond his porch, snow, dust of fields, and the moon looked like bone. He hadn't been back on duty long. 3 months since his suspension. 1 month since he'd stopped drinking. The badge on his nightstand still smelled faintly of the liquor he'd spilled the night he lost control. The night his temper turned his gun hand into a fist. Ranger stirred again. Another bark, sharper this time, and Luke's body answered before his mind did. He reached for the flashlight, thumbed it on, and swept the beam across the yard. Nothing, just frost on the truck hood and an old fence leaning into the dark. Then Ranger growled, low from the chest, and bolted toward the road. Ranger, heel! But the dog didn't listen. Luke grabbed his coat, the holster, the cold metal of his flashlight. When he reached the road, the dog was pacing in circles at the edge of the ditch, barking into the dark like the ground itself was whispering. Luke swung the beam down and froze. Something was there. A shoe, a small one, mud-caked, torn lace, half buried in the frozen dirt. He felt the old dread climb his throat. "God damn it," he whispered. Ranger whined, pawing at the soil, nose working fast. Luke knelt beside him, scooping aside clods of earth with his bare hands until the shape beneath took form. Fabric, pink, the corner of a jacket, then the faintest smell of iron and decay. He stumbled back. "Dispatch! This is Unit 7. Possible body, Highway 12 near the Hollow turnoff. Request immediate backup." Static. Then, "Copy, Unit 7. Backup en route. 10 minutes." 10 minutes in Stenner's Hollow could mean a lifetime. He looked again at the shallow grave, at the child-sized jacket. His stomach turned, not just at the sight, but at the memory. The girl from Cheyenne, 12 years old. Never found. "Easy, boy," he muttered. Ranger pressed his muzzle into Luke's palm, trembling. The wind cut through them, carrying the scent of oil and something else, sweet, chemical, wrong. Luke stood, scanning the road. Headlights glowed far off. Another car coming. But when he blinked, the lights vanished, swallowed by the fog. He told himself it was nothing, just nerves. He was wrong. By the time the sheriff's cruiser arrived, the night had gone silent again. Sheriff Dan Keller stepped out, heavy boots crunching frost. "You called me out for another coyote, Mercer?" Luke didn't answer. He just pointed. Keller's jaw locked when the flashlight beam hit the dirt. Christ. They worked in silence. Keller photographing, Luke marking ground with stones. Ranger sat still as a statue beside them, his breath rising in plumes. When they lifted the fabric, Keller hissed through his teeth. "Empty." Luke frowned. "What do you mean empty?" "No body. Just clothes. Weighted down." He knelt closer. Inside the jacket pocket, something glinted, a metal tag. Luke picked it up. A number etched into steel. "Looks like a freight tag," Keller muttered. "From the rail yard." "Freight doesn't come through here anymore." "Exactly." They exchanged a look that said everything neither wanted to speak. Luke pocketed the tag, feeling the cold metal burn against his palm. Ranger sniffed the ground again, then turned nose to the wind and started walking toward the tree line. "Where is he going?" Keller asked. Luke didn't answer. He just followed. The trail led down a slope into the trees behind an old feed store that had gone bankrupt a decade ago. The place was a husk of wood and rust, with the faded logo of Midwest Grain Company still clinging to the wall. Ranger's barking turned desperate, echoing off the walls like warning shots. Inside, Luke's flashlight cut across chains hanging from ceiling hooks, their ends dark-stained. A metal chair bolted to the floor. The smell, ammonia and fear. "Jesus," Keller whispered. "What the hell is this place?" Luke crouched near a drain, tracing the rusted line that ran across the floor. "Looks like they used it recently." Keller's hand went to his holster. "Let's call this in." But Luke wasn't listening. He'd found something else. A phone, cracked and dead, lying near the wall. The case was pink with a sticker that read, "I love my dog." He knew that sticker. He'd seen it before. On a missing poster stapled to the post office board last winter. "Dan," Luke's voice was tight. "This belonged to Madison Hale." Keller froze. "That's 2 towns over." "Yeah," Luke said, "and that's her tag number." The sheriff looked around the dark room again, suddenly uneasy. Who else knows about this place? Nobody. Not anymore. They both knew what that meant. Someone had been keeping it that way. Before Keller could answer, Ranger's bark changed. It wasn't warning anymore. It was terror. He was clawing at a door in the back, frantic. Luke yanked it open. A tunnel yawned beyond, old and black, the air inside warm and stale. "Jesus Christ," Keller whispered. "Where does that go?" Luke felt the cold metal of the tag in his hand again. "Rail yard. Underground," he said. Then, from deep in the dark, came the faint sound of movement, the shuffle of feet, chains rattling, a muffled voice. Keller's flashlight flickered. Ranger growled low. And Luke, heart-hammering, whispered, "There's someone down there." He should have waited for backup. Every instinct told him that. But instincts were what got him suspended in the first place. And what might save whoever was in that tunnel now? He drew his weapon, clicked on the secondary light, and stepped inside. The walls closed in fast, brick and earth, sweat slick. He could hear his breath bouncing back at him. The tunnel sloped down, deeper than he expected. Behind him, Keller's voice echoed, "Luke, hold up." But Luke didn't. At the bottom, the tunnel opened into a chamber. Old freight crates lined the walls, stenciled with half-faded letters. "N.W. Cole, property of Midwest Transport." Ranger's barking turned shrill, echoing off metal. Luke turned the beam toward the far end and froze. Cages, 3 of them, all empty, except one. Inside, huddled in a torn blanket, was a girl, maybe 17, pale, dirt-streaked. Her eyes caught the light and flinched. "Hey," Luke said softly, lowering his gun. "It's okay. You're safe." She shook her head violently. "No, no one's safe. They're coming back." "Who?" But she didn't answer. Her gaze had locked on the tunnel behind him. Luke turned, flashlight trembling, and saw shadows move. Men. 2 of them. One carried a shotgun. The other smiled. "Well, look who finally found a basement," the man said. His voice was casual, like a neighbor greeting someone on a Sunday morning. "You weren't supposed to see this, Officer Mercer." Keller's voice came from behind. "Drop it." A beat, then chaos. Gunfire ripped through the dark. Ranger lunged, the sound of his snarl tearing through the tunnel. Luke hit the dirt, fired twice. One man dropped. The other fled deeper into the dark. When the smoke cleared, Keller was on the ground, shoulder bleeding, grimacing. "Go," he hissed. "Go after him." Luke hesitated. "Go, damn it." Luke ran, Ranger beside him, barking into the black. The tunnel twisted, then opened into a wide chamber filled with crates and the stench of diesel. And, at the far end, an opening to the old railway line. Headlights flared, a truck engine roaring to life. Luke raised his weapon. "Stop." The driver didn't. The truck lurched forward. Ranger bolted, leaping onto the side rail, teeth snapping at the driver's arm. Luke fired once. The windshield cracked. The truck veered, slammed into the wall, and died with a hiss of steam. He ran to the door, yanked it open, but the seat was empty. The driver was gone. Only a blood smear on the gear shift. Back at the chamber, Keller sat pale but alive, the girl clinging to him. Luke crouched beside them. "We need to get her out." "She said there's more," Keller murmured. "More kids. Other tunnels." Luke looked down at Ranger. The dogs were matted with dirt, eyes burning with something almost human. The way of what they'd uncovered pressed down like the ceiling might collapse any second. "Then we're not done," Luke said quietly. Ranger barked once, sharp, certain, as if agreeing. And in that moment, Luke realized something. This wasn't discovery. It was warning. Someone had just lost control of a secret, and they were going to make sure it never saw daylight again. The sun rose over Stenner's Hollow without warmth. Just pale light spilling over dead grass and smoke curling from the burned-out truck near the feed store. Sheriff Keller's wound had clotted, but his face had gone gray. He sat on the tailgate of an ambulance, cigarette trembling between his fingers. The girl, now wrapped in a sheriff's jacket, watched from the back seat of Luke's cruiser. She hadn't said a word since they pulled her out of the tunnel. Just kept glancing at Ranger like the dog was the only thing tethering her to this world. Luke leaned against the hood, staring at the freight tag again. The metal felt heavier now, like it had soaked up the night's violence. Keller exhaled smoke. "I sent the girl's photo to the state task force. They'll want to talk to her." "She won't talk to them," Luke said. "How do you know?" "Same way I know she hasn't eaten in 2 days and hasn't seen sunlight in longer. She trusts the dog, not us." Keller nodded slowly. "We can't protect her here. If this thing's as big as it looks." "It's bigger," Luke interrupted. "That tunnel wasn't built for one job. It's part of a network. That tag came from the old rail yard, right? I'm betting that's where they move people. Underground routes, off-book shipments." Keller stared at him for a long time. "You've been off duty 3 months, Mercer. Maybe don't run wild with theories yet." Luke turned his head, eyes cold. "You think last night was a coincidence?" "No. I think you're about to do something stupid." He didn't answer. He just whistled softly. Ranger jumped down from the cruiser and sat at his heel. Keller sighed. "Where are you going?" "Rail yard." "Hell you are. You're still on probation." "Then you'll have to arrest me." Keller flicked the cigarette away, muttered a curse, and grabbed his coat. "You're not going alone." The Stenner rail yard had been dead for 20 years. Rows of freight cars sat rusting under the gray sky, their sides tattooed with graffiti. The wind rattled the loose tin from an old maintenance shed. Luke parked just beyond the gates. The air smelled of iron and rain. Ranger jumped down, nose to the ground immediately. "Still think I'm chasing ghosts?" Luke said. Keller didn't reply. He was staring at the tracks. 2 sets of fresh tire marks cut across the dirt, leading toward the storage depot. They followed them quietly, weapons drawn. At the depot door, Luke crouched and pointed. Lock's been replaced recently. Keller's hand brushed the holster. "Then we knock." Luke shook his head. "We listen." Ranger's ears twitched. A low hum came from inside, electrical, machinery, and beneath it, a faint voice. Maybe a man's. Maybe a recording. Luke whispered, "On 3. They counted silently. 1, 2, 3. Then Luke kicked the door. The bang shattered the stillness. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The room was filled with monitors, open laptops, and crates marked agri-supply. A man spun around in a swivel chair, startled, not armed, just scared. Mid-30s, wiry lab coat. "Don't shoot," he blurted. "I'm maintenance. I just checked the systems." Luke grabbed him by the collar, slammed him against the wall. "What systems?" "The ventilation, the refrigeration units. I don't know what they're for. I just get paid to keep the compressors running." "By who?" The man's eyes darted toward the far end of the room. A metal door sealed with a keypad. Luke followed his gaze. "What's behind there?" I'm not allowed." Ranger growled. Okay, the man stammered. "Storage. They said it's just storage." Luke shoved him aside and approached the keypad. "You got a code?" The man nodded quickly and tapped it in. 2-0-1-7. The lock clicked. The door creaked open. Cold air spilled out. And the smell hit first, chemical disinfectant mixed with rot. Inside were large, industrial freezers, each one labeled with dates. Some were empty, others not. Keller cursed under his breath. Jesus Christ. Luke's throat tightened. Inside one freezer, wrapped in plastic, was a child's shoe. Another held a stack of manila folders, each marked with initials and ID numbers. He flipped one open. Photographs. Names. Ages. These aren't dead, Luke muttered. They're inventory. The maintenance man was shaking. I didn't know. They said it was food storage. Luke's voice went low. Dangerous. You've been running the power for a trafficking depot. I swear I didn't. But Luke wasn't listening anymore. He'd turned toward the far corner, where a faint metallic clicking sound echoed, like a chain scraping metal. He walked toward it slowly, flashlight up. There, half hidden behind a curtain of tarp, was another tunnel entrance, and beside it, a security camera still recording. Keller swore again. We need the feds, Luke. This is too big. Call them. Luke said, I'm going down. Don't be an idiot. Luke looked back. Last night, that girl told me they were coming back. She wasn't talking about the two we shot. There are more down there. Ranger's bark echoed through the depot like a shot. Then silence. Luke disappeared into the tunnel. It was deeper than the first. The air grew hotter, heavier. He could hear the hum of generators and the faint clank of machinery below. Ranger led the way, paused silent on the dirt. The flashlight beam caught carvings on the tunnel walls, numbers, initials, tally marks. Someone had kept count. When they reached the bottom, the space opened into a vast underground chamber lit by a single hanging bulb. At its center stood a table, metal, surgical, the kind you'd find in morgues. Around it, cages. And in one of those cages, slumped but breathing, was a man. Luke rushed over, cutting the lock with his knife. Hey, stay with me. The man blinked awake, skin pale, lips cracked. You shouldn't be here. I'm getting you out. They'll hear. Who? The man shook his head weakly. The buyers. Luke froze. They're still here. The man nodded. Shipment due tonight. 2 trucks. Ranger's growl deepened. Luke's pulse hammered in his ears. How many? The man coughed, blood on his lips. 8, maybe 10. But they're armed, and they don't take prisoners. Luke looked up at the ceiling. A faint vibration traveled through the pipes. Above-ground engines. They're early, he whispered. He turned to Ranger. Time to move. When they emerged, Keller was waiting near the trucks with 2 deputies. The maintenance man was gone, probably bolted the second Luke disappeared. You were right, Keller said grimly. Convoys just pulled off Route 9. 2 of them, and we've got no signal down here. Luke checked his weapon. We stopped them before they leave. 3 of us against 10? 4, Luke said. Ranger counts. Keller cracked a bitter smile. You're out of your goddamn mind. Luke's reply was flat. You're just realizing that now? They took positions near the depot door. The rumble grew louder, diesel engines rolling closer. Then headlights cut through the fog. 2 trucks stopped outside. Men got out. Heavy coats. Radios. Not amateurs. Luke's finger tightened on the trigger. Wait for it, Keller whispered. The first truck's door swung open, and a voice called out casual. We're here for pickup. Where's the handler? Another man replied from the dark. Inside. The knock came at 3:07 a.m. Luke sat awake at the kitchen table. Coffee gone cold, the sound of Ranger's breathing filling the silence. He didn't move when the knock came again, slower this time, deliberate. When he opened the door, Sheriff Keller stood there, hat in hand, eyes bloodshot. Couldn't sleep, Keller said quietly. Neither could I. Keller stepped inside, boots leaving a trail of mud. He looked older than he had the night before, like something had been peeled away. I made the call to the feds, he said. Task force is coming in tomorrow. They'll take over the tunnels, the depot, everything. Luke watched him carefully. You sure that's the first call you made? Keller froze mid-step. What's that supposed to mean? You called the county impound before you called anyone else. Keller's mouth worked once before words came out. I had to move the trucks. They're evidence. You moved them without state authorization. The silence that followed was thick, like snow pressing on glass. Luke rose slowly. How deep are you in this, Dan? Keller's jaw clenched. Don't start. Tell me you didn't know. Tell me you didn't cover for them. Keller's voice broke low. You think I wanted this in my county? You think I looked away for fun? Luke's pulse thudded in his ears. Then why'd you keep the tunnels off record all these years? Because I was told to. That stopped him cold. Keller sat down heavily in the chair opposite him, the old wood creaking. You remember the flood of '09? When the rail company went under? Yeah. They didn't just leave. They paid out half the county council to keep quiet about what was buried down there. I was a deputy then. Orders came from the state. Close the tunnels. Mark them unsafe. Forget they ever existed. State orders? Yeah, except the men who came weren't from any agency I could verify. Black SUVs, cash briefcases, the whole deal. Luke's hands curled into fists. And you stayed quiet. Keller's voice cracked. You think I didn't try? They own the place, Luke. Still do. The moment we stepped into that tunnel last night, we stepped on property that doesn't officially exist. Ranger let out a low growl. Luke looked toward the window. Faint headlights rolled up the road, stopping just short of his gate. Dan, he whispered, tell me you didn't bring them here. Keller's eyes were wet. I didn't have a choice. Luke's gun was in his hand before the first door slammed outside. The night split open. 3 men emerged from the darkness. Clean suits, rifles with suppressors. Not locals, not traffickers. Professionals. Keller stood frozen in the doorway as one called out, Sheriff Keller. Step aside. Luke raised his weapon. You're trespassing. Not for long. The first shot shattered the porch lamp. Luke dug behind the counter, dragging Keller down with him. Ranger bolted toward the hallway, barking like thunder. Gunfire tore through the cabin walls, with splintering. Coffee exploded across the table. Keller gasped, clutching his arm. They said they'd just talk. Luke snarled, You sold me out. I thought they'd take the files, not... His voice broke in pain. Luke grabbed his jacket, jammed the USB drive with the photos into the inner pocket. They're not here for evidence, Dan. They're here to clean house. Ranger barked again. A man screamed outside. Luke kicked the back door open, fired twice into the dark. 1 man dropped. Another took cover behind the truck. He crouched, checked his mag. 3 rounds left. Keller, he said quietly, you can still make this right. Keller's breathing was ragged. How? Buy me 10 seconds. Keller looked up, tears glinting under the flicker of firelight. That's about all I've got. He stood, stepped into the open doorway, and shouted, Hey, you want your deal? You want to bury this? The gunfire cut him down mid-sentence. Luke moved before Keller hit the floor. Ranger leapt through the window, teeth sinking into the throat of the man nearest the truck. Luke shot the second. The third fired back, grazing Luke's shoulder, but the return shot dropped him instantly. Then silence again, only Ranger's panting, and Keller's final breath. Luke knelt beside him. Why, Dan? Keller's hand trembled. Because I was tired of being afraid, he whispered. But they never stop, Luke. Not till the story dies with you. His eyes went glassy. Luke sat back, shaking, blood seeping through his shirt. The air smelled of gunpowder and rain. He looked down at Ranger. We're not letting it die. By morning, the cabin was ash. Luke had rigged the stove with kerosene before leaving, wiping his prints off the shell casings. When the county patrols came, they'd find bodies. No officer left to blame. The USB drive now sat inside a metal box under the seat of his truck. He drove north. The radio stayed silent. At a gas station near the state border, he bought dog food and coffee, then used a payphone. 1 number, no name, a contact he hadn't called since a suspension. When the line clicked open, a woman's voice said, You're not supposed to be alive. Guess that makes 2 of us. Luke said, I've got files. Real ones. Kids, tunnels, shipping routes. It's tied to state contracts. She paused. You realize what you're saying? I realize what I'm carrying. Where are you? Doesn't matter yet. I just need a name. Someone who can get this to the right hands. Another pause. Then, you're asking for ghosts, Luke. Nobody touches trafficking ops. They go too high. He looked at Ranger, who was watching him silently, tail still. Then I'll start low. Where it all began. He hung up. The rail yard looked different in daylight. Smaller, ordinary. You'd never guess what lived beneath it. Luke parked by the depot, now swarming with state agents. News vans lined the road, reporters pacing the mud. He stayed back, hat low, watching. The girl they rescued, Madison Hale, stood near a medic tent, wrapped in a blanket. When she saw Ranger, her face lit for the first time. She whispered his name and hugged him hard. Luke swallowed the lump in his throat. A female agent approached her. "We'll get you home soon, sweetheart." Home. Luke almost laughed. The word sounded foreign now. He stepped closer to the fence. Another agent spotted him. "Sir, you can't." But Madison turned, eyes wide. "That's him. That's the man and his dog." Luke froze. Cameras swung toward him. The agent frowned, muttering into his radio. He felt it then, that instinctive shift in the air like before a storm. If he stayed, they'd take him in. Maybe silence him like Keller. If he ran, he'd vanish for good. But the story might live. He made his choice. Luke knelt beside Madison, pressed the USB drive into her hand. "Keep this safe," he said quietly. "When someone asks what happened down there, tell them everything. Don't let them clean it up." Her voice trembled. "Where will you go?" He looked toward the horizon, someplace quiet. Then he turned and walked away. Ranger followed. The news broke 3 days later. Local officer killed in house fire. Human trafficking ring exposed. The world believed Luke Mercer was dead. It was easier that way. He watched from the road stop near the state line, truck engine idling. The TV over the counter played the report. Keller named posthumously a hero. The task force credited with the rescue. No mention of the tunnels. No mention of the rail shipments. Luke smiled bitterly. Guess they buried it anyway. Ranger rested his head on Luke's lap, eyes soft. He rubbed the dog's ear. "Doesn't matter. She's alive. That's something." The road stretched ahead. Pale dust. Fading sky. No destination. He pulled the truck into gear. As they drove, the sun dipped low over the plains, staining the clouds red. The radio crackled faintly with static. Then a voice, soft, uncertain. "Luke Mercer, if you're hearing this, the files you gave her made it. They're in federal hands now. You did it." He stared at the speaker, hardly breathing. Ranger barked once, sharp and proud. Luke smiled, eyes wet. "Good boy." He turned the dial off, leaned back, and watched the road disappear beneath the wheels. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned.